the head coach for the University of Michigan. And my first thought is that Ward Manuel needs to be fired immediately. He has destroyed Michigan athletics. He let Eric Babkich walk when he took a northern team to the College Baseball World Series. He hired Juwan Howard and let John Beilein walk out of the building for no reason at all, seemingly, and then hired a head coach in Juwan Howard that had no business being a head coach and was born on third base. And now, the worst, most egregious thing that he has done, he has let Jim Harbaugh, who just took Michigan to a place it's never been before, winning an outright national championship, and the person that architected that whole thing is no longer at the university because of his incompetence. I don't particularly blame the president, Mr. Santaono. I don't particularly blame the regents, because when it comes down to it, it is the athletic director that is responsible for who gets hired and who leaves. Now, do I think Santaono could have put his foot down toward Manuel and said, get the contract done, give him whatever he wants, and 120% more than that? Yeah, he probably could have done that. Do I think that's an unreasonable standard to hold the president of the university to? Yes. We'll get into more stuff beyond just this in this video here. This is not something that I had planned to make, nor is it something that I really have any sort of idea to approach rationally. I'm pretty much just going to go stream of consciousness here. So without further ado, I would like to say hello and welcome to the JSA Studio. I'm your host, as always, Nathan, and today we're going to be talking about Jim Harbaugh leaving for the Los Angeles Chargers and what that means going forward. I suppose we should start by looking back at Jim Harbaugh and what his legacy is going to be, or at least what I think it probably should be looked at, because these past 3 years have been spectacular. That's absolutely true. And as I've already said, he's taken Michigan to a level that it's never been before, which is legitimately and pretty unquestionably the best team in college football in a single year. He brought the program out of a 20-year stretch where they had no plan to play against Ohio State every year, and in the vast majority of those years had no real chance of beating Ohio State. Now, over the past 3 years, Michigan has been the better football team very clearly in all three of those games, and more importantly, they won those games. However, Jim Harbaugh leaves Michigan with a 3-5 record against Ohio State, which for all intents and purposes is a 3-6 record, because we all know they would have lost in 2020. And those first 5 games, when he went 0-4 against Urban Meyer and 0-1 against Ryan Day, likely would have been 0-2, when we're talking about legacy, matter just as much as the last 3 years. So there is quite a bit of recency bias going around with people talking about Jim Harbaugh. However, the fact remains is that he is the 4th straight now Michigan coach who will leave the program with a losing record against Ohio State. And he's damn lucky that he didn't have a losing record against Michigan State as well, because he's 5-4 against Michigan State, including losing 2 games to Michigan State where he had absolutely no business losing those games. Now, he does have a 6-3 record against James Franklin and Penn State, which is good because Penn State is largely considered to have been the 3rd best program in the Big Ten during his tenure. So that's good, but even then, if he doesn't win the past 3 years, if those wins are vacated, then guess what? His record against Penn State is 3-3. However, he's also the only coach in Big Ten history to win 3 straight outright titles. He and Urban Meyer are also the only 2 Big Ten coaches that have won a playoff game and won a national championship in the outright era. And he leaves Michigan as the coach with the best win percentage in the history of the modern program. I'm not going back to Fielding Yost. I don't care about Fielding Yost. And also, just as sort of a last thing here, he was the first coach in the history of the Big Ten to go 15-0 in a season. He's likely going to have a quarterback drafted in the first round for the first time in a very long time for the University of Michigan. I don't know when the last time Michigan had a quarterback drafted in the first round was. And all of these things are true. So, what is Jim Harbaugh's legacy? And even though Jim Harbaugh is gone from the University of Michigan, his legacy is not yet fully defined. I fully expect within the coming hours, I'm recording this at 7:45 on Wednesday, the day that the news broke. The news broke like 45 minutes ago. It broke around 7 o'clock. And I fully expect that maybe potentially even by the end of today that Sherrone Moore will be announced as the next head coach for the University of Michigan. Do I think there's a possibility they might take a few days and reach out to a Brian Kelly or somebody else? Yes. If Brian Kelly, for some ungodly reason, would leave LSU to come for Michigan, I don't particularly think I would care that much. All that being said, Jim Harbaugh's legacy is not finalized at the University of Michigan. Not because I think he'll return one day in some significant capacity. I don't believe he will. But rather because of what a legacy is. And as the great playwright Lin-Manuel Miranda said, a legacy is planting seeds to a garden you'll never see. Sherrone Moore is now a massive part of Jim Harbaugh's legacy at the University of Michigan. Because if Sherrone Moore manages to keep the culture that Jim Harbaugh has put in place, which is going to be a very tough task to do, and manages to keep the team rolling and competing for national titles by making the newly expanded playoffs year in and year out, then Jim Harbaugh's legacy becomes greater. It becomes a legacy of not only did I put the program in a place where it's never been, but I also handpicked the next head coach of the University of Michigan, who went on to do all of these other great things for the University of Michigan. And if Sherrone Moore fails, then Jim Harbaugh's legacy is going to be hurt slightly, I think. Because hypothetically, this is the guy that should get the job because Jim Harbaugh is almost certainly going to give him the ringing endorsement to be like, oh, this should absolutely be the next head coach for the University of Michigan. And that is going to be part of his legacy. And that seems like a good transition into talking about Sherrone Moore. And the first thing I want to say about Sherrone Moore is that we have no idea what he's going to look like as a head coach. Yes, we saw him coach 4 games this year in which Michigan went 4-0 in game. So we might know a little bit about what he'll look like in game. However, we have no idea what he is going to look like as the head coach of the Michigan Wolverines, because he was not the guy running practice. He was not the guy breaking down practice huddles at the end of practice. He was not the person coming up largely, probably, with the game plans. And more importantly than all of that, he was not the guy that recruits looked at and said, this is the guy who's running the program. I think there's a strong possibility we lose a whole lot of 2025 and beyond commits. I think there's a strong possibility you see some of this incoming freshman class transfer out. And I think there's a smaller possibility, if Sherrone Moore becomes the head coach, that you will see some younger freshmen / maybe redshirted guys transfer out. If the goal of the program is to remain competitive next year, Sherrone Moore gives you the best chance to do that. If the goal of the program is to remain a nationally contending football program, I'm not positive Sherrone Moore is the best guy for that. And if it were up to me, I would, right now, if I was Ward Manuel, I guess I'll frame it like that instead. If I was Ward Manuel right now, I would walk into Jesse Minter's office or wherever the hell he is right now and hand him a blank check and say, you're the new head coach of the University of Michigan. Because what Jesse Minter does on the defensive end is A, much harder to do, and B, much harder to find than what Sharon Moore does on offense. I think Sharon Moore is a good game planner, a decent play caller, and an elite offensive line coach. However, you can find better play callers and better game planners, which if you're going to be a head coach that calls plays, which I imagine Sharon Moore would do that, if you're going to be that, you can find quite a few better options than Sharon Moore. And I don't think you can say that about Jesse Minter. I don't think there's a better defensive game planner and a better defensive play caller than Jesse Minter in college football right now. However, Jesse Minter is as good as gone. He's going to go with Jim Harbaugh. He's going to be the defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Chargers. I would give that like 99% in terms of a chance of it happening. I'd give that like a 99% chance of happening. Sharon Moore is probably going to be the head coach. I imagine he will promote Kurt Campbell to be the offensive coordinator to convince him to stick around. Jay Harbaugh is also likely gone along with Jesse Minter. I don't know if someone like a Steve Clinksdale would want to go to the NFL. He seems like a college guy to me. I don't know if someone like the defensive line coach, Mike Elston, I think is his name, or something like that. I don't know if he would want to go to the NFL, but I think Jim is going to take as many coaches as he can convince to come with him, including potentially maybe even Sharon Moore. And I think it's more likely, and there have been reports of this from some reputable accounts, as far as I can tell, that Jim Harbaugh would actually like Kellen Moore to stay there and be the play caller. I don't know if that's true or not, but there have been reports of it. But I think if Jim Harbaugh could take every single coach on this staff, aside from Sharon Moore, who becomes the head coach, he would do it. Quick aside here, before we pivot back to talking about Sharon Moore and potentially the future of this program. I am no longer a fan of Jim Harbaugh. I'm not going to root for him on the Chargers. I'm a Lions fan. If the Lions play the Chargers, I'm going to root for the Lions. I don't give a fuck about Jim Harbaugh anymore. And he is now, at this point in time, the enemy, because he is going to try to poach coaches from this staff. And my fury at Ward Manuel and everybody else will be talked about later, okay? But right now, the only enemy that the University of Michigan has is Jim Harbaugh, to keep him from poaching this coaching staff. That is the only objective right now. And unfortunately, it is very likely to be a losing battle. Now, I'm also scrolling through Twitter here just to kind of see what's going on. It appears that Sharon Moore already has the job. And due to state laws, it has to be posted for 7 days. So we'll get an official tweeted out a week from now about how Sharon Moore is the next head coach for the Michigan Wolverines. I don't think you'll see a mass exodus of players. I've already talked about this. I think you might see some of the incoming class transfer out. I think you might see a couple of the younger guys transfer out. But I don't really think you're going to see any of the major players transfer out. I don't think we're going to see Donovan Edwards. I don't think we're going to see Will Johnson transferring. I could be wrong, but I think it's unlikely. I think for next year, Sharon Moore, in terms of being competitive for next year, that is, Sharon Moore is probably the coach to go with. I don't really think Michigan's going to interview anybody else. I mean, I do wholeheartedly believe Brian Kelly would rather be at Michigan than he would at LSU. However, I don't think Michigan is going to hire Brian Kelly. And even though I personally wouldn't be against it, but him and Sharon Moore, I think would kind of be equally as good hires. And at this point, there isn't a home run hire. At least in my opinion, it isn't a home run hire. It could turn out that Sharon Moore is a home run hire. It could turn out that maybe he's going to hand off the play calling duties to Kurt Campbell, and Kurt Campbell is that dude. That could happen. It could be that Steve Clinkscale is just as good as Jesse Minter. because I didn't necessarily think Jesse Minter was going to be as good as Mike McDonald, or maybe even better. So that could happen. Maybe Sharon could go to the Ravens again and hire their outside linebacker coach to call the defense again. I don't know. But right now, there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the program, and that's the first time in damn near a decade that we can say that. And I am, generally speaking, a very negative person. But with Sharon Moore, he has earned the benefit of the doubt for the most part. And I think there's a very good possibility this team could still be solid heading into next year. I think 10-2 with Sharon Moore and no Zach Minter is probably a ceiling, but that is a problem for next year. So we're going to go off the reservation here for a minute, but I promise I'm going to pull it back, okay? When I was in college, I was a history and political science dual major, okay? So I kind of know what certain things look like. I have a very analytical mind. And given the reports that are already out there, I think it's pretty obvious to say Jim Harbaugh and Ward Manuel did not like each other very much. But more importantly than that, I do not believe for a second that Ward Manuel made a genuine attempt to sign Jim Harbaugh to a contract extension. I don't believe it for a second. This reeks, and I mean reeks, of the same kind of poorly ran institutional bullshit that is a public sort of thing, as when the Miami Dolphins signed Ndamukong Suh away from the Detroit Lions, and like 5 minutes before that was made public news, the Lions leaked out that they had made him like a 6-year, $101 million contract, and he signed like a 6-year, $110 million contract with Miami. So it's like, oh man, if he wanted to stay in Detroit, he could have taken a little bit less money. They never made the fucking offer. Ndamukong Suh's agent, like the next day, tweeted out something very vague that was effectively saying the Detroit Lions never made us a contract offer, even though we probably wouldn't have taken it seriously anyway. So when the news today came out that Michigan had finally given Jim Harbaugh a contract that he could actually sign and basically given him everything that he wanted to, it was simply for the fact that Ward Manuel could then turn to the Regents or Santa Ono and say, hey, I did my best, even though he fucking didn't. And everybody knows that he didn't. But it's one of those things that you see in politics and history where everybody knows it's not true, but we have to pretend that it is. But a major reason I dropped out of college was because I don't play politics like other people. When I see bullshit, I call it out. And Ward Manuel did not make any effort whatsoever to re-sign Jim Harbaugh. And Santa Ono let it happen. Santa Ono could have fucking fired Ward Manuel any goddamn time he wanted to. There is no clause in their contracts or anything that would prevent Ward Manuel from being fired. It just means Michigan would have to pay him like $3 million. But $3 million is fucking nothing for this university. This university probably, it has north of $1 billion at their disposal, with a B, okay? Between endowments and boosters and potentially other not necessarily fully legal things that universities are allowed to do, the money ain't the goddamn problem. Just like giving Jim Harbaugh the amount of money he wanted wasn't the problem. What Jim Harbaugh wanted was loyalty, and the University of Michigan did not offer that to him. But more specifically, Ward Manuel didn't offer that to him. So when I was talking about my history and political science dual majors a minute ago, I know what this shit looks like. I know what it looks like when someone is trying to cover their ass. I know what it looks like when someone is not genuinely trying to do something. I know what it looks like when someone is negotiating in not necessarily bad faith, but sure as fuck not as good faith. And most importantly, above all else, I know what it looks like when somebody in power wants somebody else, maybe in equal or slightly lesser power, out the goddamn building. And that, and nothing else, is the story of Jim Harbaugh leaving from a Michigan fan perspective, not necessarily a rational college football perspective, but from a Michigan fan perspective, the story of Jim Harbaugh leaving is Ward Manuel did not want Jim Harbaugh to be here. So, Ward Manuel should not be here. If the choice was, and this, I believe, genuinely was the choice, between Ward Manuel, who let John Beilein walk for no reason, who let Eric Babkich walk for no reason, and hired maybe the worst basketball coach in the history of Michigan basketball. If the choice was between that guy and the head football coach that just took you to a place you'd never been, you should have fucking fired Ward Manuel. This guy has no business being employed by the University of Michigan anymore. He has proven now on not just one or two occasions, but like 4, 5, 6 occasions now to be utterly incompetent as an athletic director. I don't know what kind of dirt or shit that he's got on other motherfuckers, on the Regents, or on Santa Ono, or whoever the fuck, okay? He's got dirty pictures of somebody, okay? Or he's got audio of them buying a hooker. I don't fucking know. But he has no business being employed by any college in any capacity, at least athletics related, because he is, without a doubt, one of the worst athletic directors in college football. Okay, so to end this tirade, I'm going to talk about a couple of miscellaneous things. Ben Herbert is not going anywhere. He is one of the 10 highest paid strength and conditioning coaches in college football, and they do not make a quarter of what the average college football strength and conditioning quarter makes in the NFL, okay? So Ben Herbert's not fucking going anywhere. You see routinely that strength and conditioning coaches stay at programs typically, even though the head coach goes somewhere else. You do see that fairly often, okay? So I am not really concerned about Ben Herbert going anywhere. I'm not concerned about him going with Jim Harbaugh. Maybe somebody could come in and offer him ridiculous amounts of money and he'll go be the head strength and conditioning coach for their program, but I think that's unlikely. I think Michigan, given the fact that they just signed him to an extension, would probably match any offer that he had anyway, and I'm not positive that another college football team would want to potentially have the buyout that Ben Herbert is going to come with, because he just signed like a 5-year extension. He's not going anywhere. I'm not concerned about it. And yes, that is important. I mean, I would walk into Jesse Minter's office. I've already told you this. But at this point, I would walk into Jesse Minter's office and I'd say, cool, what do you want? 7 million? 8 million? Stay here, be the DC? Cool. Let's do that. But that's not what they're going to do. Plus, I don't think Jesse Minter would take it. Even I don't think he would take that even if I offered it to him. As it's pretty clear he wants to be in the NFL. And generally speaking, most coaches would rather be in the NFL than in college. There's a couple of guys that are like college coaches, you know what I mean? But generally speaking, if you're a coach, particularly a higher level coach where you call plays and stuff like that on either side of the football, you would rather be in the NFL than anywhere else. Because in the NFL, all you do is football. There's no recruiting, there's no talking to parents, there's no worrying about if a player is eligible or not. There's not nearly as many rules and regulations about as shit you can do and when you can talk to the players and when you can't talk to players and when you can practice and when you can't practice. So generally speaking, coaches would rather be in the NFL than in college football. So there's no realistic chance, I think, that Jesse Minter returns as a defensive coordinator. So the question now becomes, we've got to go out and find a motherfucker that can call defense and potentially be an elite guy like Jesse Minter. Because if Michigan's defense is not all-time great, if it's just elite and not all-time great, Michigan doesn't sniff a national championship this year. They don't get anywhere. They don't beat Penn State, they don't beat Ohio State, and they probably lose to Maryland. So you're looking at the barrel like 9-3, and they also probably lose another game that they have no business losing. I don't know who they would go out and get. Like, I don't think there's a name that pops into my head as like a guy they could go out and get as a defensive coach, but I'm sure they know people more than I do. So once they hire somebody, I can talk about it maybe. But for right now, I don't know. The only person that I could really think potentially you would do is Steve Klinkscale. Again, maybe you hire him, you promote him to full-time DC. I think the only real reason he was co-DC was because he would have left for a DC job if he wasn't promoted to co-DC. I think it's the same reason why Mike Hart is likely to either leave with Jim Harbaugh or get another coaching job somewhere else. So I guess top to bottom here, I think there's a good chance Michigan retains Newsome, the tight end coach. He's probably going to offensive line coach. I think Michigan retains Campbell, the quarterback's coach. He's probably going to OC. I would not be surprised if Rod Bellamy comes back. He's like a 50-50 guy to me. I could see him staying at Michigan, and I could see him going to the NFL. Jesse Minter is almost certainly gone. I think Steve Klinkscale, if he doesn't just outright become the DC, is probably gone. I don't think he would want to either remain co-DC or potentially just take the straight up demotion to just being a secondary coach. I think he probably would rather just leave with Jim Harbaugh or potentially try to get a DC job somewhere else. So I think right now I'm leaning towards he's gone. I think Mike Elston is probably going to stay. I'm a lean stay on him. I don't really have a reason for it, just a gut feeling. I could be wrong, and as I've already said, Ben Herbert is not going anywhere. The linebackers coach probably isn't going anywhere. He doesn't seem like an NFL guy, especially considering that he was like an assistant coach last year. So, yeah, I don't know. But Jay Harbaugh, special teams / safeties coach, he's almost certainly gone too. I would be absolutely astonished if he wasn't gone. And Mike Hart, I think, is 50-50 in terms of him going with Jim Harbaugh, but I think he's probably like 90-10 in terms of leaving the program. I would be surprised at this point if Mike Hart is passed over for the OC spot and he stays. That would be absolutely astonishing to me. I don't particularly think his ego would probably let him stay in that scenario, but I suppose it's not impossible. Last thing we're going to talk about here is the state of the channel. I have neither the time nor motivation to upload 3 videos a week anymore. At some point, Monday through Friday, I will upload at least 1 video a week. I'm not going to try to keep it consistent or say that I am going to upload 1 video like every Friday or something like that. I don't know. The next few weeks are going to be rough. I have to pick up extra shifts at times I don't normally work because one of my bosses is going on vacation for 2 months. So, well, it's not technically a vacation. She's having surgery, but it is what it is. The next video that comes out on this channel will probably be a top 3 quarterbacks video where I talk about Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, and Drake May. And I don't know when that'll come out. It will probably come out at some point next week. I'm going to count this video as my video for this week. Nevertheless, Jim Harbaugh is gone. Sharon Moore is the future. And I'm not necessarily super pumped for it. But what do I know? I'm just some asshole on the internet giving you his opinion. So at this point, I'd like to remind you to like the video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, and if you disagreed with me or you just have something to say, go ahead and drop a comment down in the comment section below. And now with the outro out of the way, there's only one thing left to say, and that's that I'll see you next time.